to today's virtual design review panel meeting for Block 16 on Pier 8. I'm Jennifer Roth, a planner, the one who apparently doesn't know how to update meeting invites and have sent out multiple ones with confusing links. Again, I am so sorry about that. I appreciate your patience with me. I'm a planner with the City of Hamilton's Planning Division and the host of this meeting tonight, but panel members Jennifer Mallard and Ted Watson will be chair and vice chair. Before going into the administration and purpose of the meeting this evening, I would like to start with the city's land acknowledgement. The City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. The land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. This design review panel has been called to implement the council-endorsed implementation process outlined in the Pier 8 Block 16 Urban Design Guidelines. This process has required the proponent, being Waterfront Shores Partners, to develop 3 tower design options for Block 16, each of which is required to demonstrate innovation in each of the following 3 areas: quality of life, sustainability, and exceptionalism, which is defined as excellence that is emblematic of the renewal of Hamilton Harbor. The focus of this panel today is to review the 3 tall building proposals for Block 16 that have been developed by Waterfront Shores Partners and to provide advice and feedback on the 3 different tower designs. The feedback and advice heard today, along with comments from the public from the community meeting held on March 8th, and technical staff comments will be used to inform one final tower design that will return to this panel for final comment at a second session on April 27th. I'd like to take a moment to introduce the panel members for this unique design review process for Block 16. This will just be the very abbreviated version of the biography, so forgive me. There's too many of you to go into all the details, so forgive me. So as I said, Jennifer Mallard, who's the chair, she's a principal at Diamond Schmidt Architects. Ted Watson, the vice chair, he is a partner and architect at MJMA Architect and Design. Calvin Brooke is an architect, urban designer, planner, and is the co-founder of Brooke McElroy. Eldon Theodore is a planner and partner with MHBC. David Cluzia is an architect and the vice president of the architectural design at Nora Architects and Engineers. Tony Capito is a professional engineer and currently is the Mohawk College Research Chair in Sustainable Building Technologies. Petra Matar is an architect and principal at DPAI Architects. Richard Witt is an architect and principal with BDP Quadrangle. And Paula Hamilton is an architect with Toms and McNally Design. In addition to the panel members, we have Mark Keller, Development Review Planner from the City of Hamilton, who will be doing a staff presentation. We also have the applicant team from Waterfront Shores Partner, and then city staff from the Municipal Land Development Office visible on this meeting this evening. There are many individuals observing the meeting tonight. There's city staff from the Planning Division, as well as members of the public and some media, I believe. This session is being recorded right now, and it will be available to review and watch again if you'd like, and it'll be posted on the project webpage. And just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted if you're not speaking. Jennifer Mallard, please begin the meeting.
Thank you, Jennifer Roth. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of this design review panel. Jennifer, can you please confirm that this session is being recorded?
Yes, it is.
And I'd like to ask the panel members if there are any conflicts of interest. I'll take silence as a confirmation of no conflicts. Okay. Before getting into the staff presentation, I wanted to reiterate that the purpose of this panel is to provide urban design advice to the Planning Division staff and Waterfront Shores Partners on the 3 tower options for Block 16, Pier 8. It's not to pick the design that we like best. As stated in the mandate for this panel, we will be constructing advice as it relates to the following questions. Number 1, to what extent do each of the proposed options implement the Pier 8 Block 16 urban design guidelines? Number 2, to which extent do each of the tower design options capture the standards and the design criteria required to create a unique building with high quality design and exceptionalism? Number 3, to what extent do each of the tower design options portray innovation in sustainability and quality of life for occupants? Number 4, to what extent do each of the proposed options serve as a visual anchor and regional and metropolitan scale landmark? Number 5, are there design considerations that have not been contemplated that would contribute to design excellence, innovation in sustainability, and quality of life for occupants? And lastly, what are the key features related to design excellence, quality of life for occupants, and/or sustainability that are integral and should be carried forward to the final proposed design for the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment and site plan application? Now moving to our agenda item, which is the review of the 3 tower design concepts prepared by Waterfront Shores Partners for Pier 8 Block 16. The city's development review planner on this file is Mark Keeler. Good evening, Mark. We're ready for your presentation, and please keep your presentation to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Jennifer. Again, my name's Mark Kaler. I'm a senior planner with the development planning section of the planning division, and I'm the development review planner assigned to the file. So I will keep this brief. Some of what I was going to say was actually just covered by the chair and by Jennifer. So what I'm going to do here is just quickly set up the context of the site, a little bit of background, and some of the key considerations and areas that staff are looking for advice on from the panel today. So again, we're here to consider a development proposal to permit a new multiple dwelling with a maximum building height of 45 stories or 147 meters. So this is the location of the site. This is Pier 8. The municipal address is 65 Guy Street. The site itself is, I apologize, they're both the same color, but it's the shape inside at the north northwest corner of Pier 8. It's known as Block 16. So this is just a view of Pier 8 as you enter the site from Guy Street. So looking towards the harbor, down Discovery Drive. Here's a closer view of the subject lands currently occupied by a surface parking lot. Adjacent to the northwest, you have the Discovery Center, institutional building. And to the west, you have Pier 8 skating rink and open space, and there's a Williams Cafe there as well. And then to the southwest, you can see the North End neighborhood and downtown Hamilton further to the south. Again, to the southeast, some existing residential buildings, lower scale residential homes. And then to the east, you see the more industrial part of the harbor. So just by way of background for everyone listening, we're here in part because of minutes of settlement that were executed in September 2019 to resolve appeals respecting the zoning bylaw and draft plan of subdivision to implement the setting sail secondary plan as it applies to Pier 7 and 8. And as part of that settlement, the parties agreed that the city would bring forward official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications for Block 16 to consider permitting a residential and mixed-use building either in a mid-rise or a high-rise build form. So that's the applications that's been submitted, and that's what we're here to review today. As part of that settlement, the number of units within Pier 8 would not change. It's capped at 1,645. As well, a minimum of 15% of those dwelling units are required to be family units, which is defined as having 2 or more bedrooms. And as part of the settlement, there's a sliding scale where with additional increases in height on Block 16, it would result in additional required family units. So in this case, for a 45-story building, there would be an additional 150 family-sized units above and beyond the 15%. So following the settlement, the city has undergone a 2-phased planning process. The first phase was completed in July 2021, and it was the Pier 8 Block 16 Urban Design Guidelines. And those guidelines built up upon work that was done previously for Pier 7 and 8 and has provided more specific design direction for Block 16 itself. And as part of those design guidelines, Jennifer Roth mentioned briefly, there's an implementation process that we're well into now, and that started with the submission. Well, it started with the approval of or adoption of the design guidelines by council in August 2021, the submission of the OPA and zoning bylaw amendment in November, and then there was a statutory public meeting that happened in February 15, 2022. The purpose of which was to present the application to council, receive feedback, and take that feedback back to influence the process going forward. Since that time, the applicant has gone back to develop the 3 tower proposals. There's been a public information center that happened on Tuesday, and now we're at our first design review panel, and there will be a second one in April, as Jennifer mentioned previously. All this is gearing towards a second planning committee meeting in September where a staff recommendation will be made and council will ultimately, or planning committee and then council will ultimately make a decision on the applications. So I won't spend too much time on this. This is the location again of the Block 16 within the overall Pier 8 development site. And here are the three tower proposals that will be detailed by the applicant. So some key considerations, and these are based on the guiding principles of the Pier 8 Block 16 Urban Design Guidelines. I'll just read them out quickly. Recognize the public role of the site, requiring a high quality development of exceptional design. It should create a metropolitan landmark and visual anchor at Pier 8 that is emblematic of the harbor's renewal. It should express environmentally sustainable features, green design references, and high quality landscaping. It should animate surrounding pedestrian areas with active uses and create a high quality and accessible public realm. It should offer a high quality of life for residents of all ages, including family-friendly units design and generous outdoor living space, and should also provide appropriate transition and sufficient separation distances between development on the surrounding blocks and public spaces. And we usually end these staff presentations with the questions we're asking the panel members. Jennifer Mallard has already read those out, so I won't do that again, but I'll just leave those on the screen as I close. There's 6 questions, and again, staff will take this feedback back through our review, and we're working with the applicant to improve the proposal going forward. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mark. I think we're now ready for the presentation from Bruce Corbera of KPMB and Luka Matutunovic of Purpose Building, who are representatives from Waterfront Shores. Bruce and Luka will provide more detail about the 3 tower design concepts. Please keep your presentation to 30 minutes. Bruce?
Thank you, Jennifer. So this is, an image that was kind of a version of the submission for the OP and rezoning, and that it shows the tower at 45 stories, 147 meters, viewed from the water over the bay, and with the fabric, the mid-rise fabric of the competition scheme that was submitted back in 2018 for Pier 8. And then on the far right, you can see the marina, the Discovery Center, Williams Cafe. And in the distance, you can see the escarpment, the Niagara escarpment that creates the mountain in Hamilton. And for me, it's always been about the water, the land. This is landfill, but the land of the downtown, which you see multiple buildings layered back, and then the escarpment itself. And I know this area quite well because I grew up in this neighborhood called the North End. So what we're going to do is Luca will be presenting specifically on our approach to sustainability and quality of life. I'm going to start with positioning the design of the tower and its fundamental organization and elements, and then Luca will present, and then I will come back and show the 3 building options. So let's go to the next slide, please. So talking about the context, it's really understanding Hamilton as a city that was an industrial powerhouse in the 20th century at the very tip of Lake Ontario, the western tip, and a very sort of a generally triangular bay that's defined by the Skyway Bridge on the right, and the McQuestion Bridge, which is John Lyle's bridge that he did with Proctor and Redfern in the 1920s. And then below that bridge, there is, to the west, is Cootes Paradise, which is really extraordinary. And then you see the James Street North line of sight, which is the main street of, it's always the high street of the North End when I was growing up. And we never had access to this land. And across the way, you can see the places that we went to as a family, to LaSalle Park and the Royal Botanical Gardens. And from there, you get incredible views of this particular site in this particular location. It's very exceptional. In fact, it's a kind of hinge point between the North End, the city, and this triangle of elements and this spray of elements that form the kind of panorama of Hamilton and the identity, many of the most identifiable sites, public places. Next, please. The site plan, which was shown, but this is with the, it's really with the kind of competition site plan for the other blocks. You see Guy Street at the bottom, the streets, John Street, sort of Middish, and Catherine Street on the right lead right through and connect. It's a very good plan of small blocks. And one of the things I draw to your attention is the shape of this site, and the site which was in the competition institutional land use, and part of the settlement was to basically maintain the overall number of units that you're looking at on this site plan at 1645, but to lower the heights and number of units on blocks 7 and 8, which are closest to the low-rise fabric of the North End. And the circular shape of the building, which we're showing now, is really a response to the shape of the site, which we will show you more about. And it lands and is sort of scaled to the rest of the buildings, Waterfront Trust Center and Williams Fresh Cafe. Even though the tower is much bigger, the podium base, which is set at 3 stories in the urban design guidelines, does a lot of work on this project to really make it relate to the other blocks. We're sort of stepping down. You can see on the east side of block 16, we share a pedestrian muse with block 1. GH3 is designing block 1, and we had in this competition, as you may know, a number of other designers, like block 2 is Super Cool, and block 4 is Omar Gandhi, and we're doing the building on the far east side of the site. So it's understood to be in this in relationship to the whole sort of formation of Pier 8, the horizontal element with it's in here called Greenway is very important. It forms the southern edge of Block 16, and it passes through the entire site. All streets lead to the water, and this site has water almost all the way around it, so it's extraordinary. It's out there, and it has the potential to be a beacon. Next. Okay, the three lenses: design excellence, sustainability, and quality of life are very comprehensive. Let's go to the next slide. Brooke McElroy did the urban design guidelines, which this building, the way we've been approached it, tracks those urban design guidelines. There's a chart of every condition of the guidelines, and where we are at variances, we would make note of them. But from the project that was the demonstration project in the urban design guidelines, we rotated the building more to the west and away from Block 1. And we developed a circular form that addresses that panoramic view and the idea that this is a vertical marker. And the podium, the three black dots, are really the front entrance of Pier of Block 16, but the front doors to Williams and the Discovery Center, which will become a welcoming center. It's going to go through its own transformation. Next. This is a cartoon diagram of the three fundamental elements: the podium, a 30-story element which steps, and then out of which emerges the primary tower to 147 meters. And so there is a transition. You'll see it in some of the comparative perspectives. Next. The same set of elements with a little more detail. The idea that we would make something at the top that was identifiable, the shaft of the building, where we actually have a very disciplined floor plan, which we can show you. And then number 3 that whole floor is amenity space for residents, and the facade is extended up to provide wind protection and enclosure privacy. Number 4 is the end of townhouses, which face number 5, which is the pedestrian mews that leads to the water. Number 6 is the vehicular drop-off for garbage and loading, and also, drop-off vehicles, Uber taxis, and vehicles, descending to the lower parking levels. There is parking below this building on multiple floors. Number 8 is the sort of podium on the let's say Greenway side. Number 7, there is a kind of loggia that wraps around the prow end of the site closest to Williams. Next, please. These are the 3 sort of demonstrations of building form that were in the urban design guidelines, all of which fit within the dotted blue envelope, which is a kind of 5-sided figure. I think in that study, which was very comprehensive and led to all the urban design guidelines, number 3, the oval scheme, was preferred. We have developed a purer form than that even, and rotated it to the west on a podium that is continuous and outside of the footprint of both the secondary and the primary tower. Next. We worked closely with RWDI, who most of you are familiar with, but they did computational fluid dynamics modeling of this site, which is inherently windy on the water. That'll always be a windy site, but we wanted to make a form that would be aerodynamic and in itself not contribute to the negative impact of wind on the public realm, on the podium, in balconies, outdoor private areas, on the rest of the fabric and public spaces of Pier 8. Next. Compliance with the urban design guidelines has been something that we track very rigorously, and there's a chart that you will hopefully get access to, but to see exactly point for point how the scheme responds to everything in those guidelines. Next, please. And I'll give you some examples. You know, on the left is the guideline and then the proposal. And, you know, we're meeting all the height limits and area requirements. Go to the next. That was building height. And then there's the gross floor area for zoning above grade. Next. You know, the 3-story podium, we didn't have that at the time of the submission. After RWDI finished their preliminary report, we extended the facade another floor, which provides a lot of protection for the ground level comfort for pedestrians. Next, please. Just some really diagrammatic drawings of the podium and the interior area of the podium, and then there's the roofed area of the podium. You see that it's quite an interesting figure of, you know, this long row of townhouses facing east, you know, the secondary tower making a transition over the ramps that go to the below grade, and then the tower kind of achieving a kind of pure form right on the nose of the site. Next. The floor plates, these are the interior floor plates as presented in the urban design guidelines. So 650 and 850. Next, please. And then, you know, the impact on the public realm or the shaping of the public realm. Next. A lot of this is common to all three, although depending on where the design goes, I fully suspect that these will move in relationship to the design of the secondary and primary tower. So this is an essay based on the cylinder that was the pure cylinder that was submitted. You can see the core formation with 3 elevators that serve the full tower, and then the 4th one is to the right, which serves all the floors below 30. We're still working on that, but right now we drop off the right-hand side elevator after we hit floor 30, so that the tower becomes at 650 square meters, much tighter. The core becomes much tighter. There's a scissors there, and then there's a kind of moon-shaped sort of crescent of a lobby that has 2 entrances. One is on Haida Avenue, facing Williams and the ice skating rink, and the other is facing the lake, and that's facing, it's protected by the roof of the podium. So all of that area is protected. So you have a dry area for drop off and so on. You see the garbage in the garbage room, but the lobby is really kind of taking advantage of the northwest views. The townhouses all face east, and they have some interesting shaping going on at the water's edge and on the greenway. Kind of rolls the podium into that muse. And in the guidelines, the units were to be live work. Next. 2 stories. These are some really early sections that we did, and you'll see these will change, but it sort of shows you the podium sort of stepping out and forming a sheltered area near the lobby, which is double height. The lobby's very high, very tall. Next. These are just very preliminary models of the podium and the towers, and so you see the kind of coalescing or intersection of the 2 towers, and then it's picked up in the podium. You're seeing the loggia, the lobby is under the primary tower. You know, the solid walls are over the parking, and that may change. And then on the right-hand side, you get townhouses. Up above, you see where the tree is. That's the landscape courtyard terrace around. It's kind of an apron around the 2 tower elements. Next. The muse, very simple, but they're within the language of the podium. And they have entrances biased to the north side, trying to get a kind of corner window to living rooms and bedrooms looking towards the water. Next. The drop-off court on the water side, and the townhouse, the end townhouse is at the left. Next. And the main entrance
Have we lost Bruce?
Yeah, I've lost it too.
Okay.
Perhaps we should go to Luca until Bruce returns.
Luca, can you let him know, Bruce, know that we don't see or hear him?
I will let him know that, and I can bring up the presentation, but Jennifer will need to just enable the sharing.
For whom? For Luca?
Well, sorry, I guess we don't need to. It's still showing.
Can you host the slide deck there, Luca?
Well, it's Francesco that's actually driving it.
Oh, okay.
So happy to skip ahead to the sustainability section while Bruce navigates the bandwidth or technical difficulty. So Francesco, if we can advance, I guess, the slide.
I will skip ahead. I'm also trying to text with Bruce to see what's happening.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to listen to us share this exciting development. I'm going to talk a little bit in terms of sustainability and quality of life of the proposal. We can go to the next slide. One of the things that I just wanted to sort of set just a bit of context in how we have approached this. The urban design guidelines that have been created are, in my experience, one of the most comprehensive set of sustainability frameworks that have sort of overlapped to create a framework that is going to lead to something that is, well, quite frankly, hasn't really been delivered to date. And so what we've done is we've created a sustainability implementation plan, and I'll walk you a little bit through that, and then I'm going to talk more about the specifics of what we are doing. I think it's important to recognize and appreciate how we are managing the guidelines and the complexity and the implementation of individual elements. Next slide, please. So in terms of context, I mean, the requirements and the sustainability framework is very complex. It is very robust and comprehensive. There are elements of it that are very progressive, and there are elements that are, quite frankly, market leading. There's a good balance of qualitative and quantitative measures and items. And some of them are not entirely specific. There is more of an intent that we are demonstrating compliance with, and I think that leaves room for the necessary design iteration that needs to be part of this process. There's sort of three broad categories in how we've been approaching it. You know, there are things that we will comply simply by the nature of the design. You know, things like a building automation system. Oh, looks like Bruce is back. Bruce, we decided to jump ahead a little bit.
I think you should continue, Luca.
Okay, that's fair. So things that would be considered typical and just require us to make sure that they are implemented right now or throughout the rest of the design process. Elements that will require a greater level of design team collaboration to achieve, and then elements that we think are really innovative and will push the boundaries of what's been delivered in this kind of market-driven residential tower. And then a note about just compliance, I guess. There are elements that I think we can demonstrate intent and a direction, but some of the mechanics and the tactics will need to be obviously implemented later. You know, things like commissioning and airtightness testing. Next slide. So you may have seen this from the presentation to the public on Tuesday night. Those of you that have attended, this is a very high-level implementation roadmap. But the next slide is more important in that we have taken this robust framework and we have mapped it onto work streams. So if you can advance the slide deck, Francesco. broken up into 4 broad categories. One is about the integrated design of how all of these things fit together, and both envelope, mechanical, electrical, energy supply, structural systems, how all of that coordination and all of these design concepts are fitting together. There's a stream of performance analysis with respect to energy modeling, life cycle. So this is directly addressing the operational and embodied carbon elements. And then there is a certification work stream. This will be, to the best of our knowledge, the only development of its kind that will be triple certified. And by triple certified, I mean Energy Star multifamily, high-rise, well standard, and LEED certification. And so there is a work stream that is advancing how all of those elements fit together and how they respond to the urban design guidelines. And then there is, this process that we are in right now in terms of the stakeholder engagement, the design reviews, and ongoing collaboration with the city. Next slide, please. You hopefully have had a chance to look at the full checklist. There are the vast majority of elements that relate to sustainability have been marked as compliant, or as I mentioned, the design will be proceeding in a direction where they will be met at the appropriate time and confirmed. There are several of them that have partial compliance, and then there's a couple of them that may lead to some good discussions either today or down the road. Next slide. So I'm just showing an example here. So big picture, the sort of the main work streams of integrative design, really the lenses that we are looking at it in terms of focus areas within the lens of sustainability are really reducing carbon emissions by focusing on energy efficiency and electrification, so reducing the reliance on fossil fuels. In terms of resilience, the building will be designed for the climate of 2050, and the way we do that is to ensure that all of the systems are sized based on current code requirements, but we also run energy models with future weather files to see what happens in a warming climate and how to size in particular cooling systems to be able to respond to fewer heating degree days and more cooling degree days. And then passive elements that start with the massing and the facade, and then go beyond that into things like ventilation, heat recovery, and solar control. Just a couple of notes on the massing itself. Bruce will be showing later on the 3 options, but the main point for me is that none of those options really any of the elements of the design guidelines, and there is fairly minimal difference in their contribution to individual items. In other words, the options in themselves are all heading in the same general direction in terms of meeting the intent and the specific requirements. It's a very compact massing form, which will inherently reduce heating loads. We have a very low ratio of the facade to the floor area, and so that is another element that will contribute to reduced energy demand. That simpler form will also lead to reduced thermal bridging. There's very little facade articulation that doesn't serve a functional purpose. And then recessed balconies themselves are not only providing quite a lot of shade, important shade in the summer, while still allowing us to benefit from passive solar gains in the winter, but they are also enhancing the thermal comfort and quite frankly, quality of life of people that will be standing on those balconies relative to a projecting balcony. And the solar radiation studies that we've done so far do demonstrate a reduced cooling load in the summer, and basically very little impact on the heating loads in the winter. Next slide. In terms of how that performance analysis piece workstream fits into the integrative design workstream, you are all familiar with a top line approach to high performing buildings. in that we are starting with the site and the climate, and there's been moves that have been already made, and analysis that was done by RWDI that informed that siting. And now we're in sort of the middle element where we are focused on envelope concepts that are going to be reducing loads, choosing efficient HVAC systems, spending quite a lot of time exploring the options for low carbon energy supply, and all of that is continuing to get iterated and integrated together. Next slide, please. This is one of, in my opinion, a very important part of how I read the urban design guidelines in terms of the intent to reduce operational carbon emissions. This is certainly a direct contributor to the City of Hamilton's overall mission and mandate. And those of you that have spent time, as many of you have, looking at metrics like this will immediately recognize that I'm sort of mixing and matching relative and absolute performance. And so this is not meant to be absolute, but this is meant to be directional and indicative of where we are currently sitting and intending to achieve in terms of carbon emissions, so somewhere between 30 to 50% better than what would have been typical of a Hamilton high rise. And we can certainly return to this if there's additional questions, which I'm sure there will be. And then in terms of the energy intensity on the next slide, similar looking, again, similar comment about these not necessarily representing of every LEED silver building as a energy use intensity of 150, but they are sort of directional. And again, we are showing some Toronto Green Standard benchmarks that some of you may be familiar with in terms of where we are currently positioning ourselves in the design strategies that are being adopted. Next slide. And then in terms of some specifics when it comes to the things that will drive energy and carbon performance, what we're showing are key design drivers and our current level of commitment. The second column is things that we are validating and may be able to introduce. And then the last one is an aspirational column, some of which may be challenging, but some of which that we may be really wanting to focus on, and geo-exchange being in particular the one idea that we're really trying to explore and focus on in terms of delivering really exceptional operational carbon performance. Next slide. And then in terms of quality of life, this is, I think, where we are demonstrating innovation and really going beyond what has been done to date. I'm not aware of any residential building of this kind that is registered for the WELL standard. The WELL building standard is a very robust framework that includes 10 key concepts that have to do with the air we breathe, the water we drink, and how we experience space and the kinds of materials that we're putting into our buildings. So this will be one of the ways in which we are demonstrating quality of life, and several, quite many, in fact, elements of the urban design guidelines will directly be met through the pursuit and achievement of WELL certification. And on the last slide for me, examples of what we mean by that and some of the initial moves that are being factored in to design in terms of water quality, air quality testing and monitoring systems, providing access and connection to nature, being mindful of acoustic privacy, and then creating something that really will be a delight and a beautiful building and a beautiful site that can be experienced and enhance quality of life and well-being. I think that's it for me. Oh, right, last slide. So in terms of what we are expecting to show you at Design Review Panel 2, so we will be coming back with more detailed energy modeling results, a firmer commitment on operational carbon performance, more details of our certification strategy specific to Energy Star, LEED, and WELL, and some preliminary ideas of embodied carbon options. Full life cycle analysis is one of those things that we expect to be doing later by the nature of the process and the kinds of information and data that is required. But I will say again, in response to the massing, the stacking of the floor plates, the minimal amount of facade articulation, all of those things are directly going to reduce the amount of embodied carbon, and specifically concrete and structural steel. So we are already capturing some initial moves that are going to move us beyond what's typical. And now we're getting into the materiality analysis, that will try to drive that even further. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now.
We can.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. No, yeah, we can go back and pick up, and I'm just going to go really as quickly as we can through this. We're walking around the site. Go to slide 24. Yeah, this is just a very preliminary view of the lobby looking sort of north. Go to the next. You know, you can see the elevator core, reception desks, very notional, but it's, you know, very very generous and very open to the water's edge. Next. This is up on the roof level and the amenity level, which is where the tower, you can see it on the left. There's a protruding canopy which helps comfort levels, downdrafts, and then there's a tall glass screen and a bunch of areas for sure planting. I mean, these are just the ingredients, not the final design. Next. And then a series of views from the Skyway Bridge, and you see the steel company, where the steel company was incredible in its heyday off on the left, and then you see one tower. It's a single tower, the white tower, a lighter tower. Next. A view from LaSalle Park. Again, you know, the water, the land, and then the escarpment in the distance. Next. View from the mountain, looking at towards the north end, and you see again those elements: the water, the land, and the escarpment on the horizon. The Burlington, looking out to Burlington. Next. And from John Lyle's bridge, where he created 4 pylons, 4 identical bilaterally symmetrical towers, which was all about connecting the water at the Desjardins Canal below it, which connects the bay to Cootes Paradise, the land, this land bridge. And then he extended those towers to frame the view into Hamel. This was always the gateway into the city and takes your eye up to the escarpment. And this building at Pier 8 is, in a way, really seen from these other landmarks in Hamilton. Therefore, for me, it implies a kind of civic quality to the building. That's what we would like to try to achieve, something that is not looking like a commercial residential building, but something that is much more, let's say, abstract and simplified and pure. Next. Leona Station is a limestone building on the right. The yellow line is the center line of James Street and the right of way. And so when I say it's a kind of pivot, it's not the terminus of the axis. It's part of it. Obviously, you're going to see it, but it's as though the axis goes by and across the site on its west side. Next. And then the left is the balcony. The blues are really about inset balconies, because projecting balconies will not work on the site. So we asked RWDI about this, you know, to enclose them within the structure, and they believe it is much better to do this. Next. Just some diagrams of dimensions so that you could use those spaces as outdoor living spaces, furnish them, eat outside. Next. And then the two floor plates, the Pier upper part from 31 to 45, and on the left, the lower tower, let's say, with the 4 elevators. You see all the elements of the core. And you also see the 2 and 3 bedroom units, of which there are many of them. Next. Wind mitigation, next. Okay, the big thing since we submitted formally to the city was the podium roof extending beyond. Next. To create wind mitigation, elements that RWDI suggested as screens and coniferous plantings. Next. The heavy wind is from the south and the west. Examples that everyone talked about, but we wanted something integral with the building form. Next. And then let's jump across this to the 3 building options, and I'll try to wrap this up. Okay, the 3 design options are based on the fundamental form of the massing of the podium, the 30-story and the 45-story. The cylinder was, what we developed first, and we thought it was really powerful and unique. But we're asked to really look at some other options, and we're looking at the idea of the waves was interesting because it began to create concave and convex surfaces undulating and really disciplined to what is essentially a kind of 9-square plan for the upper part of the tower. And it also had the opportunity to segue and into the 30-story tower in a fairly graceful way. And then we developed Lily, which has got a more organic form, more reference to, a botanical shape, a lily, but abstracted, but having the same fundamental character in terms of being aerodynamic, and also a different scale of transition into the 30-story element, which you see off to the right. It's always been a big concern for us. Next. So the first one, it has the vertical spacing of vertical elements which roughen the surface. If it were smooth, it would be a different story. We want a rougher texture on the elevation of the building, having to do with wind mitigation. Next. And then you saw in the competition, relative to the competition scheme, the city, all the elements. Go to the next, please. Let's move through these. The dark areas in this very preliminary rendering are the inset balconies. They form, you're seeing the shadow in there in this rendering. I mean, these are very preliminary. Next. The idea that the roof is set back, the mechanical room and the elevator overrun and penthouse are there, but we think we can make something very subtle and very but very strong in scale with the whole building. Next. From the Greenway looking west, the value of the 30-story element stepping up to the cylinder, and you see a bit of the podium. Next. And then the final one, an aerial right from the competition. We photoshopped, the cylinder into it, and you see its relationship to the hockey rink, the marina, and so on. Next. It's a 360 panoramic view building. The waves sort of carry the sort of bilateral symmetry, I guess, of 8 around the whole building in a continuous sort of shaping, and then makes a transition into the 30-story element. Next. And it kind of creates more vertical creases on the building and kind of bay windows around it. Next. And a kind of rippling effect of the cylinder. The cylinder is very singular. Next. And a different kind of crown, like the shaping of it is fairly important, and it's lighter maybe. Next. And you see its effect on the 30-story element, and that's the final view. And then the last option is Lily, which is slightly oblong and kind of beguiling because it's not symmetrical in any way, and it has a suppleness, but it captures that floor plate really well. Next. It has a different scale reading. It has that kind of indented crease. Just one. Next. On James Street, and next. From the west. Next. From the Greenway. And from the air. And then this is the concluding slide, which is, you know, it's really essays on and iterations on a fundamental form dealing with the perimeter. And I think the metaphor of the building, while retaining the high standards of sustainability for all of them. I don't think like one is more sustainable than the other. I think it should be a dialogue about what should this building achieve, no matter what option is developed, and also the quality of life. I think for all three options should be as high as they can possibly be with the standards and certification of WELL. So those are the three: the cylinder, the waves, and the lily. And we're open for questions. And thank you. And sorry again for the glitch, the technological glitch.
Thanks, Bruce and Luca. And at this point, we're going to take the opportunity to ask each of the panel members if they have any questions. So these are clarifications or technical clarifications. We're going to limit this section to questions only, and hopefully we can go through this quicker in order to save time and allow more time for commentary. So we'll go through the roster of the panel members, starting with Richard.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. First one is, could you explain the intended mechanical system and how that's sort of implemented or disposed around the building?
It was hard to hear that, Richard. Could you?
Oh, sorry about that. I said, could you explain the intended mechanical system and how that's implemented or disposed around the building?
Good question. I think the starting point is a water loop heat pump system, so in-suite heat pumps in individual units with integrated energy recovery ventilators at a fairly high level of effectiveness. The starting point is a conventional boiler cooling tower arrangement, but where we are leaning towards is displacing a portion of that boiler plant with low carbon sources. And right now the leading contender is geothermal, or I should say ground exchange bore field. There may be an air source heat pump that will have to weigh against some other elements that may want to be on the roof instead. But right now, the idea would be that we are still maintaining that condenser loop infrastructure, and we're feeding it with low carbon heating energy from either the ground, the air, or perhaps even a combination of both.
Thank you. Second question, has your wind study so far involved tunnel testing that inform the design, or are you working with kind of best practices or understood and expected conditions?
RWDI developed a CFD model, so it's more, computational simulation. I think that a wind tunnel would be great if we get to on the final scheme, or the scheme that comes before you. We'd have to factor in the time, to build that model. We've done this on many projects before, and RWDI is certainly capable of rendering the results of that.
Okay, so it's a CFD desktop study with your
and best
inside it.
And best practices, Richard. They produced us, gave us a range of strategies for wind mitigation.
Okay, thank you. There's no other questions.
Thanks, Richard. Petra, do you have any questions? Petra, we can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. My first question is programmatic. This is a landmark building. Was inviting the public in to use it ever considered? And with that, I mean access to the lobby, access to a rooftop terrace, and making the views accessible to the greater public.
The proposal of a rooftop bar or center was proposed, but it's not something that is in the scheme. I think that the ground floor is very generous, and it's a question of really what kind of use and invitation would be made. I think that's where you're going for whether people who are not, owners or living in the building, do they get to participate in any part of this building? I think that's your question. So I think that's all, it's a great question, and it's just really discussable. And we can go further on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My second question is, in your presentation, you do talk about the rich context of the site and its visibility from surrounding natural and urban locations. And you do allude to how this building sits conceptually on the site as a pivot. But formally, how did the concepts of the context inform the formal appearance of the building? Or basically what I'm asking here, what is the story that the tower is trying to tell formally?
Well, I think it's in the cylindrical tower was a response to the geometry of the site, the capacity of an aerodynamic form, that was the RWDI effect, and it was also speaking in a way to the City Beautiful movement and John Lyle, and the kind of his essential interest. He's one of my favorite architects. He lived in Hamilton, and I admire his work a lot. So that's what that is. And you could read the cylinder as one of the pure geometric forms of architecture. It's a column, it's a lighthouse, it's a beacon, and the verticality of the facade was really, you could say it's a reference maybe to the classical tradition, but done in a very contemporary way. The waves was sort of trying to individualize the units, where every unit would get a kind of outward bay window on the bay, and it had we were searching for a form that was in keeping with the fundamental sort of argument for the basic form, but do it in a different way that allowed everyone to kind of look out and be sort of beyond the cylinder, let's say. And we took that elevational strategy because it does work well on innies and outie curves to kind of give you a vertical fenestration. What I've learned in projects I've done is that the vertical window allows you to look down to the water and up to the sky, and I think that's part of the feeling of being in the building, being inside a room, that you know where you are, as opposed to a horizontal fenêtre en longueur. The vertical on this site makes you aware of the ground and the lake and the sky, which is great there. Puts you in touch with those elements. The lily is a shape that actually comes from a piece of furniture that I love, British designer, but I got very interested in it because there are lilies in Cootes Paradise, and it was much more when we were thinking about, like when I lived in Hamilton, going to Cootes Paradise and LaSalle Park was what our family did, and I remember all of those experiences. And it was the other Hamilton, because we lived in the industrial North End, and across the way was nature. That was my concept of nature. And so the lily was an evocation, a memory of all the stuff I saw when over on the other side. It was less classical. It wasn't about a singular column or anything like that. It was really about a shaping. So that's the inside story of those three shapes. And you know, this site is interesting because if you look east, you look at what was the industrial heartland of Ontario when the St. Lawrence Seaway was at its prime, and you're part of the Great Lakes, and the other side was nature, you know, just green. It's so beautiful. It's one of the most remarkable sites because it's right at this knife edge between industry and nature. So I don't know, there are lots of things to think about.
Thank you for that, Bruce. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Petra. Moving on, Ted, do you have any questions?
I do. I have a couple questions. One is just a clarification. The urban design guidelines requested a 3-story podium, and what we're seeing is is in effect 2 stories with a higher perimeter screen, and the 2 stories create the double height lobby and a 2-story muse condition on the east, correct? Okay, thank you. And then the second question, in the sustainable section of your presentation, of your submission, some of the aspirational goals or standards for GHG and EY are LEED Silver, and then moving further to TGS version tier 2. And my question is simply, is that TGS version 3, which is currently in effect, or is it TGS version 4, which is coming into effect this May?
Great question, Ted. Those benchmarks are relative to version 3 that is currently in effect. I will say that even the committed column of strategies puts us within that range once we start factoring in air source heat pump and geothermal. And so there is a bit of a mismatch perhaps in what we're showing in terms of some of those benchmarks and how the design strategies that are implemented and some of the ones that are considered. So I would say that the aspirational column of strategies would push us well into TGS version 4, really tier 2, maybe even tier 3 territory. So, you know, if successful, we would be getting close to perhaps certainly below the 15 kilogram level and perhaps into the lower teens.
Great. Well, thank you. That's good to hear, because TGS version 4, or what's being shown now, will become the base level for any development permit as of May in the city of Toronto. So it's great to hear that what you're proposing potentially goes far beyond that, which is what we might expect. Public art and community participation in this design expression, are there any plans for that? I know there's been a lot of consultation on this project, but in the actual design and execution, are there plans to incorporate either of those?
I mean, I think you'd have to have, you know, Waterfront Shores, our client, really speak to that. They just recently supported one of the great winter stations on the waterfront, where there was a really great piece, which was like a red cardinal bird. And it was a collaboration between an Ontario Canadian biologist, who's really a bird watcher, and a French architect. And it was really fabulous. And I wish that would kind of stay on the site, but it's going to be dismantled, I think. But yeah, that's a great discussion, especially on this kind of very public prow. But yeah.
Okay, good to hear. Last question. We've seen the plans that demonstrate the lobby space, the units up above. Where are currently in this scheme are the amenity spaces for
They're all on the 3rd floor. all of them are on the third floor. It's where we can have access to the roof of the podium on all sides of whatever tower is the one that is really developed further. So every space, like whether, I mean, it all has access and view out to a kind of landscape that hopefully is protected from the wind, both by, you saw the lip, but the projecting canopy around the form of the tower, and then the high walls. So, I mean, that's where all of it is. There's a meeting room on the ground floor, right off the lobby. And that maybe have some optionality for, what was asked for in terms of, could members of the community, people who don't live in the building, use the meeting room? It's really well located. I think you're into discussions with the condo corporation, but I mean, I'm part of a condo corporation, and often our meeting room is used by schools and other groups. So yeah, all of that could be possible. All of ours is on that third floor. No one lives on that third floor. It's all amenity space, fitness, party rooms, all of that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Ted. Paula, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. Just referring to this slide that addresses energy use intensity, it's noted that the consideration is 20 to 40% better than a typical development. And was just wondering if there was, if consideration was given to in reducing the amount of fenestration and having more insulated wall surface, would that help reduce the energy use in the project?
Yeah, great question, Paula. In theory or in principle, and in fact, yes, it would. That is, there are an ongoing there are ongoing studies that Bruce's team is engaging right now in balancing access to daylight, thermal comfort, and heating and cooling loads by playing around with that glazing ratio. I will say that from the work that we've done to date and across other projects, energy use intensity will be pushed further to a much greater extent by our choices of what we're doing with the mechanical systems, and more specifically, switching over to low carbon energy supply. So, essentially deploying heat pumps, and then also looking at geo exchange and air source heat pumps. So the amount that glazing will be able to drive that metric is considerably smaller than the sort of multiplier effect that we get from switching to heat pumps and looking at partial electrification.
Thank you for that. My other question relates to your comments earlier. Wondering if you could just expand a little bit more on the passive aspect of the design and how that contributes to sustainability.
Sure. So the primary elements of the passive design, or the passive features, are really captured first and foremost by the massing. There is a metric that we have increasingly focused on, which is this ratio of vertical wall surface relative to the gross or occupiable floor area that it encloses, and the pure cylinder form is the best expression of that ratio, in that we are using, we're essentially reducing heating loads and surfaces available for heat losses to a far greater extent than with a more articulated or more rectangular massing. So that's one element that contributes to that passive load reduction. The other one is recessing balconies. Approximately 40% of the glazed area is being pulled back from the facade and effectively shaded from high angle summer sun, which will have a dramatic impact on reducing our cooling loads, which tends to drive mechanical equipment sizing more so than heating loads. But we're obviously going to be dialing in the solar heat gain coefficient of the glazing, again, to achieve that balance of heating and cooling loads And all of that, by pulling those balconies in, will still allow passive solar gains in the summer to effectively reduce heating load. So that's sort of the first and primary expression of the passive features in the form. And then in terms of facade performance itself, again, that is where we're still designing and still selecting what the right optimal mix of that is, being mindful again of my comment that passive design is enabling us to select low carbon systems and make sure that they are not too large or not too spatially onerous. But there's a point at which passive design sort of, well, there's a balance that we're trying to aim for between focusing on those elements versus focusing on the active systems, if you will. So I don't know if that entirely answered your question, but happy to keep talking, I guess, or give you a chance to. Yeah.
No, very, very helpful. Thank you. And then just my last question. Is there any consideration given to passive house principles informing this project?
Yeah, great question. We've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and obviously Ken Sobel was something that we looked to as an example. And I think that what we're trying to go for is, I would say, a much more comprehensive approach of sustainability or to sustainability. I think passive house is great, but I think it falls short in some of the material indoor air quality, perhaps elements of sustainability that we are absolutely focused on by, through the use of Energy Star, as well as some of the other elements, and particularly well. So again, I think we're trying to strike a balance. We have talked about it. It is not currently something that we are contemplating, but certainly we are looking for other ways that we can try to get some of the similar benefits. And then we are really focused on a very comprehensive and broad spectrum of performance that I don't think just doing passive house would deliver.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. We're running a little over time, so if I could encourage answers to be brief, moving on from here. I don't want to, this has been great conversation, but I do want to reserve some time for comments. So Tony, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do, a couple. And I'm coming at this through a sustainability lens. And when I hear the terms exceptional design and landmark, and further to what Ted was asking about, and thinking about that slide where you had energy use intensity and the aspirational column on the right-hand side, I guess the question would be, wouldn't you agree that you need to get to that aspirational column and consider this to be an aspirational design as well as an exceptional design? How do you raise that mark of design to be landmark or exceptional without really going to that aspirational column? So that would be the question, perhaps to Luca or Bruce.
I'll try, Tony, and perhaps Bruce can finish it. I think it's similar to the response to Paula in that I think exceptionalism can be viewed as going deep in one particular element, like energy use intensity. And I think our definition or our approach to exceptionalism is to introduce a very broad and comprehensive response that goes well beyond in elements like well and quality of life. So I think we're aiming for a balance and perhaps not going as deep on certain elements, but going fairly far in a large number of them.
Okay.
And thank you for that question. I mean, the work that we've done, which is very low energy and carbon reducing, has always been for institutional long-term owners of buildings where they're not a commercial building. And so we're doing several of those. And this project, I think the issue is really to try to find a balance and to really make, raise the bar, but in a context of a specific market and a construction economy. So, I mean, that to me is the challenge of the project, and to do it well, to do it in a really significant, thoughtful way.
Yeah, and Bruce, I respect that. I think I'm coming at it from this perspective. You know, given that the city declared a climate emergency a few years ago, and we're now putting up what would arguably be the landmark structure in the city. There's no question about that, and through a great architect like yourself. I think from the sustainability lens, it needs to go towards that high bar as well. And I'm just wondering, knowing about carbon and carbon targets that need to be met at 2030, 2050, has your design started to introduce that in terms of a concept about this carbon footprint? I know it was mentioned by Luca. I just wondered if you have any specific targets that you're trying to achieve by doing this.
Well, I think maybe I'll start. The specific targets are what I mentioned. I think in that sort of 10 to 15 range, which again, relative to Hamilton is a significant departure. No doubt that we are all aiming to get to zero, and we're trying to find the right balance of how we get there and which buildings get us further or how far each of us gets us. One of the things that we have been given a lot of thought is how do we enable the building over time to more successfully and more cost effectively close that gap over time. And so when I talk about future climate ready, what I also mean is not precluding the building from improving or decarbonizing beyond the current level at, on day one. And so provisioning for the expansion of low carbon systems or the convertibility of any remaining fossil fuel generation into lower carbon options. We're also being quite mindful of embodied carbon and the fact that that is something that is emitted on day one and is set in stone and can be as high as 50% of the life cycle emissions of the whole building. And so we are, I think, going beyond again the sort of the level that's been set in the market by looking at both material selection, options for low carbon concrete in particular, and obviously being mindful of structural efficiency. And I think the form is the first sort of response to that efficiency of material use.
Sorry, Bruce may have a comment there.
Well, I think that the idea of really trying to look at the locally available materials. I mean, it's always it's a challenge. It's sort of the challenge of the typology and usually they're concrete buildings, so you have material with high carbon and so but there's a lot of research that's being done on that, even in terms of how to reduce the amount of carbon in the concrete that we use. I think a lot of decisions about what materials are locally available, i.e. not imported, is really, really important. Meanwhile, a lot of the best facade material systems are imported, and so it's a kind of conundrum of the Ontario availability and construction capacity for material systems for buildings like this that can actually meet the passive requirements versus international materials which cost more to get here but actually meet those requirements. So it's sort of like for every architect on the screen, they're all dealing with exactly the same thing of trying to find material systems that make sense and go through them. I mean, we have a lab that at KPMB, and working with Purpose, I think we're going to try to just shape the best sort of material sort of selection policy based on some criteria. This takes time. I mean, even the vertical elements, what are they? Are they precast? Are they GFRC? Are they metal? A kind of prefabricated insulated metal panel that makes the profile. These are all big questions, and you know, that's what we have to go through, but make the best decision, you know, based on some research and knowledge of constructability. There are a whole bunch of factors that go into this. It's the toughest question. I think every architect on the screen is dealing with it on every project they're dealing with, trying to do the right thing.
Understood. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Luca. No more questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. David, do you have any questions? David, you're muted, I think.
Sorry, I just have a few small questions, and they're more clarifications. Bruce, at the early, when you're describing your tower and the shift, I don't know if I misheard it, but it sounded like you're saying you moved outside of the envelope when you that was defined. Is that? No, okay, I misheard that then. The other question is, you suggested that the blocks 7 and 8 would be reduced in height because of the units be moving into the tower. Can you, what's the change in that height? Do you know what the impact is? I think you're muted now.
David, thanks for that. The blocks 7 and 8 are on Guy Street, and they're facing the existing sort of small bungalows and houses of the North End. And there was a desire to reduce the scale of those. We had stacked townhouses. We had even up to 5-story buildings, interesting buildings, but I think there was a sense of trying to really lower the scale there, but the total number of units on Pier 8 would remain the same. And, you know, it was a bit like a kind of waterbed thing where if you push something low, there's going to be a kind of shifting of the unit count. And there was interest in, you know, making a signature building. And so that's what it is. To me, it's putting the tower in context with the whole fabric. So you're going to have more 2-story grade related townhouses, different type of construction on those sites, and making a transition as you go towards the water.
So it's like 5 down to 2 or something is what's happening on those blocks.
It's in that range. There are different heights allowed. And if you look at the competition scheme, we took advantage of that. But I get that idea of lower on Guys and higher.
Yeah. Okay. The other question I think has maybe been answered. It just was a little bit of, it seemed that maybe as you transitioned over to the Lily scheme, that maybe the outside ribbing pattern that you have in the original cylinder was not as strong. I don't know if that was, if there's some idea that there's a implied change there or not. I couldn't really, I don't know if I'm misreading it in the renderings or not, or if that's an accurate assessment.
Well, I think that it's really that the shaping or the outlining of the Lily is not totally regular. In fact, that's its shaping, and so it has an impact on the sizes of panels that are sort of tangent to the curves, you know, that are formed.
I guess so, the outrigger piece that's at the face of the balconies and we see these internal views of the in the column or the round scheme. Are those same elements?
No, I think they would.
They're being modified in the Lily, or probably in the Wave as well.
They will be modified because I think they have to be modified.
And just a related question on that facade is, in the size of the windows that are appearing in these close-up views, it sounds like those are not necessarily representative of where you're going to end. It sounds like that might be part of this conversation that Luca was talking about in terms of you are analyzing the quantity of glass to solid or something. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to find out is, what are we actually responding to here in these? What is the difference between the three that we're actually able to comment on here? And it sounds like it's not really at that finer grain yet. Is that a?
No, but it, and you'd have to do a lot more development of each option to get to that finer grain. But I think the questions you're asking are very architectural and really do affect the reading of the form of the building, because those vertical elements, I think, would be different. They'd be more regular on the waves, but not the same as on the cylinder. But on Lily, they would be probably, it would remain to be seen, because, and the spacing of the glazing in some really early schemes was the windows were wider, and we're trying to reduce the glazing ratio for obvious reasons. And we're trying to get towards 60, like we had a 70% one, we're trying to get to 60%. We know that's not passive house, but you're on one of the most amazing sites I've ever worked on, for sure. It's really quite incredible. So that's the balancing and the shaping of the verticals, I think, would be different for all three. They would not be the same element applied to all three outlines.
But not there yet. Anyway,
No,
that's
and
the only
a lot of work.
questions I have.
Thanks, David. Calvin, do you have any questions?
Yeah, sorry. Given the kind of aspiration for kind of an enhanced quality of life, or something that we might not typically associate with a condo tower, I'm just wondering about the kind of communal common facilities. So far, you've mentioned the meeting facility, fitness, party rooms. It's interesting when you look at the WELL kind of criteria. They talk about community, innovation, mind. I'm just wondering if you're considering options for other types of communal uses within this building.
I think that's a really important thing about WELL, that it's about individual health, but also community connection and your relationship to the community. Our lobby, the lobby is conceived to be workspace for people living in it, but and it all depends on how the condo corporation, I mean, usually, especially in the time of this pandemic, it's not easy to get into our lobby. In fact, even Uber Eats can hardly get into the lobby. And so I think on the one hand, you want a welcoming lobby, and on the other hand, you want a secure lobby, and all of the issues that there aren't that many condominium buildings I know where just anybody can come into the lobby, other than Uber Eats maybe, or Grocery Gateway, But I think we're going to try to think those through. There may be a special, the northern entrance may be slightly configured differently, where there's access to a drop-off area for food, like, and because it's constant, like in my building, it's a constant thing. But then there may be the potential for, we can look at the plan, but there's a room on the ground floor which may be able to be more of have some community access. We did that on a project that we did, which was for elementary teachers in Toronto on Isabella, but I don't know whether the community actually comes in and uses that, but it's a gesture. Yeah, but I think the ground floor of this building is not a hotel lobby. It's got to be a place where people feel comfortable spending time. And that's what's happening in the building I live in. And we actually go there to meet other people. If I sit in there, I'm for sure I meet a lot of people there. It's a really interesting mix of people.
Thanks, Bruce.
Any other questions, Calvin?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I have a couple questions. One is, when you talk about geothermal energy, or have you considered a campus-wide energy strategy? Does the geothermal field serve more than just this building? And has a water source heat pump loop been considered, given that you're right there, and given that this should be an exemplar of innovation and sustainability? Seems to me that that would present a good story.
Mm-hmm. The water side, I think, is a really interesting consideration. When we've looked at that in the past, there is a fairly comprehensive regulatory layer that gets kind of added to that. I think you're talking about an open loop system in that case, which has significant implications from an environmental regulation perspective. The nice thing about a geo exchange system, rather than sort of the conventional district energy of just burying a bunch of pipe to distribute hot and cold water, is that it is inherently a flexible and expandable system where the field can grow over time, and each building simply connects to that bore field. And so while that's not proposed at this point, I think that's an excellent opportunity to discuss further as we think about beyond just Block 16.
I have one other question that is maybe more for the city and also for Bruce and Luca. We're hearing a lot of questions from the panelists and a lot of exploration still to happen. And I'm a little worried that if we zone in on one solution for the next meeting, that we're jumping ahead too quick. We haven't seen enough detail. So question for the city, would you be open to changing the DRP plan a little bit so that we're not zoning in on one solution for the next meeting? Mark or Jennifer, can you answer that?
I think we don't want to have the committee feel that they are restrained in their requests. I do think we need to look at the degree of reasonableness of the detail that you're asking for. If it is more significant detail as it relates to the sustainability or certain, it just depends, I think. And it also depends on the willingness of the committee to meet a potential a next time. But the timelines can certainly be extended on the implementation process.
I throw that out there, not expecting a full resolution answer right now, but
we'll definitely have to
that
speak internally about that, but there's definitely opportunity for further discussion.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll move on into the commentary section and hearing from each panelist. And we'll start with you, Richard.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, thanks for a very clear and in places deductive presentation. The visuals portray a kind of pleasant waterfront existence with an almost California vibe sometimes, and it's great to hear the hometown pride and the kind of nostalgic influence. I should mention first off, though, that our mandate, as we were expecting it, which I think Jennifer just referred to, was that we're going to review 3 different options. And although there's talk about a lot of ongoing work, we can only really respond to what we see. And what we have before us, architecturally speaking, is 3 very slight variations on the same conceptual design, a sort of extrusion of a lower level appendage with some kind of wiggle variations above. Each has the same core, each has the same ground floor, essentially the same mass, and a very minor variation on the same facade, which isn't really developed. So what we've been shown is some aspirations, and a lot of talk about those aspirations, and some sound great, but notwithstanding your response, Luca, to Ted and Tony's question, I'm not convinced that some are really that high. For example, your consideration of ranges of the greenhouse gas emission as TGS Tier 2, which in May will be mandatory at 15K, which is kind of what you have, whereas TGS 2 will be dropping to 10. Energy use intensity is set at 150 to 35, which will be mandatory at 135, and the new Tier 2 will drop to 100. So more importantly, though, there's some charts, but no real explanation, I think, of how the architecture achieves any of it. I'm looking for, I hear the aspiration, and I'm looking for a demonstration of carbon reduction, which, like you say, also includes embodied carbon. For example, I want to see, in the concrete, you're including additives for how you're going to design the building to utilize lower strength concrete. The facade window to wall ratio, for example, your work stream chart said envelope HVAC and energy supply options, but we don't see any of that in the current progress. When it comes to the kind of structural systems, it's sort of diagrammatically expressed as a tube-in-tube with a central core, which I think is that in fact what it is? Is it got a perimeter structure which is connected through a diagram floor? Is that it, or is it just a conventional shear wall, gravity loads with lateral in the core? I'm not really sure exactly how the building's performing, but I feel like there should, or there could be a narrative in here. Something, you've heard a lot of comments about sustainability, but is this a way that you're trying to reduce embodied carbon? Are you trying to create flexibility for the building? Are you using that to enable architectural variegation? What appears is a very conceptual narrative, which shows a kind of primarily glass building with some light colored articulation. It's got a large penthouse on top, which betrays no real significant expression, which I would expect such a prominent building would entail. And from the discussions about the mechanical system, I'm worried it's just going to end up being a big mechanical penthouse at the top. So it all, and even in some of the plans, it all feels a bit diagrammatic with a circle and then an oval stuck on it and extruded. And there's almost no real description of the facade or the materiality. So the form as well is, though it's based on this kind of solid principle, and you've got some preliminary desktop studies, I feel like that needs to be developed in a three-dimensional way. It doesn't really seem to have developed much architecturally that explains how the narrative of a reduced structure, like I said, could be used, or a landmark form could evolve. And I'm thinking, like of the Gherkin in London, the Foster project, which also begins with this circle, but then develops the form in a way that continues to kind of mitigate wind in a kind of more advanced way. I suppose, this goes back again to Jennifer's comment. I suppose what we'd like to see is three clear options. For example, one that's passive house, explains what the implications of that are, the advantages, the disadvantages, and I know there are some. One that's perhaps based on a deviation from conventional form, something that is a narrative around what constitutes a landmark building. Maybe there's even one that's tall timber that says how a carbon positive structural system could stand as an emblem for renewal on Hamilton's waterfront. But then I understand that's not an easy ask. What would be required to achieve that? Maybe there is, one that is, kind of a development of this, something that is conventional but pushes that typology as far as it can go and demonstrates why that's an approach worthy of our consideration. Notwithstanding the quality of work I know this team can and would achieve, what's here is unfortunately a little bit disappointing in terms of what's being pursued and the level of development of the ideas within that aspiration. I believe a process like this requires that you're going all in and trying to make a convincing argument for why this deviation from what is the expected mid-rise nature of the context is warranted. I think the building needs to be an exemplar for all tall buildings in the region to live up to, and I want to see this and be inspired by its potential and its implications for the city of Hamilton. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Petra?
Thank you, Jennifer. I echo what Richard said, and the one piece I would like to add to the sustainability is there was a lot of mention in Luca's presentation about moving beyond the typical. And I just want to say that that is the minimum expectation for such a development, and we would like to see how it goes above and beyond to set the standard as a landmark building. And as a landmark building, it would be nice to re-explore the program to allow the public to come into the building and experience those views beyond. I understand that this is a residential building, but even in residential buildings that are landmark buildings around the world, the public is invited to experience the views. And considering that no other building such as this one is going to exist on the site, it is important that all of Hamilton gets a chance to experience it. Formally, the description of the three forms from a plan perspective, I don't think is going to read very well when someone is hiking in Coots or when someone is biking around the Waterfront Trail. It would be nice to see how the nature around the site informs this building in a three-dimensional manner, and seeing what possibilities those could be in three distinct options. That's it for me.
Thanks, Petra. Ted?
Well, first off, I'd just like to never had the chance to, but congratulations to Waterfront Shores and KPMB and their partners for producing an extremely successful response to the Pier A competition. It is going to be an amazing asset for the people of Hamilton. We want to thank you for participating in this process, which can deliver not just a great building on this site, but one that sets the high water mark for the city of Hamilton. Many of us sit on the Hamilton Design Review Panel, and we would love to have a tower to point to say that's what we should be aspiring to. In terms of the comments, I will just reinforce Richard and Petra's comments that it feels like we're seeing a variant on a scheme, a strong scheme, but it's really seems to be more of the progression, particularly around the envelope, and seeing some iterations or options on the base and how that podium works and how it incorporates public space, and maybe public space separate from what's part of the residential. Seeing how the tower, how it meets the sky in different ways and really becomes that kind of skyline landmark, different variations on that, how the sustainability could be realized in different fashions. I think the approach that's being taken around wind is a good one, but are there potentially others that we should be looking at? And I feel that we, as the DRP, has been asked to look at the options presented through the lens of sustainability, public realm, design excellence. And I think we can talk about formal aspects of the building, and I'll give you some of my thoughts on it. But the other elements, I don't know that we can really provide much feedback at this point because they're not really solidified. And therefore, it feels as though for this panel to serve their purpose, we would need another meeting looking at these options to then consolidate them towards what would be a preferred approach, let's say, not necessarily the one solution, but what are the elements. That's our understanding of this process. In terms of those three lenses, then, design excellence, really appreciate the approach that you spoke about, Bruce, the civic approach, the purity of this project. It is the opportunity to create an iconic building without having to mediate different scales, given trust to achieve those things. I think the challenge of creating an iconic building that can be seen from many miles away and have a pure and strong reading is how do you resolve that at the human scale, and how does the articulation of that, the details of that, really become comfortable for, say, that muse space or within that canopy. So that's something that we're interested in seeing where this goes. In terms of the development of the facade, I would say that the lily option I find to be the more successful in the sense that, one, it creates a more slender response to the tower, and that it actually changes as you move around the harbor and around the site. It gives subtly different readings that move as you move. So that aspect of it, I feel, is very successful. I would also say that the cylinder is a very iconic form, and however, I think there's things that come with that purity, and and I'm sure there's ways to move away from that, but it does have a very downtown feel, more of a corporate feel. And so moving towards these more softer curves and more expressive seems to move further into the realm of community residents in terms of what it's communicating for me. I think that in terms of sustainability, design excellence and sustainability, we have seen them merge in the last number of years. You cannot submit to the AIA Awards or the Canadian Architect Awards without a really solid sustainability narrative and energy modeling reports and metrics to back that up. And they really are one of the, I think they're the same thing. And we've seen KPMB deliver and be, world leaders in that with Manitoba Hydro, for instance, is really set the high water bar for tower design internationally, and has become that icon for Winnipeg. And one would hope that we could see the same aspirations developed here for Hamilton. We talked about LEED Silver and the mandate or what the targets are in terms of actually achieving a certification that can be committed to at this point. And given that the City of Hamilton has declared a climate emergency in 2019, and that their long-term goal is to be net zero emissions by 2050, it feels like this building really needs to set the standard. And given that the council is being asked to approve the higher tower on the site versus the institutional design that was initially recommended for this site, it feels as though there should be some stretch, some reach by this group to achieve something that truly is exceptional, not just in its design, but in its sustainability. I'm going to go on a limb and say that I believe this should be a CAGBC zero carbon building version 2. I know there's challenges with the renewable energy source, but we've seen, for instance, at places like Cornell Tech, where you can borrow PV roof space from your neighbor. The benefit of this developer is they're working the entire site. So there's aspects there. In terms of embodying carbon, I know that potentially this is a concrete building. There are hybrid forms with wood. I know KPMB is doing some of that work right now, which could reduce the carbon. I don't think that there's embodied carbon currently required with certification for ZCB. So that, I think, could be a goal that this project could achieve and be, one of the world's first to do that, or Canada's first to do that. At the very minimum, LEED Platinum, I think, is very much achievable on this site. And I would leave it to Waterfront Shores to come back to us and perhaps provide us with a commitment on a target that they're comfortable with, and we can discuss how that gets executed. In terms of quality of life and public realm, I have no doubt that this will be a beautifully designed podium, regardless of the programming. Given that it was an institutional zoning previously, it feels as though this site could really take a lot of community programming that could be separate from the residential. And again, Waterfront Shores is developing this entire site. Presumably there are areas of retail, commercial that are being ascribed to this site, similar to Pan Am Village. That's one of the really exceptional aspects of that development, is that it uses commercial and retail in a very effective way to draw people in, make them feel welcome. Nothing makes you feel as welcome as a place where you can spend your money and get a coffee or have a meal. And this seems to be the place where that could happen. A 3-story podium could accommodate many other things at the upper levels, at the mid levels of that podium. Finally, I'd like to say that, ultimately making this site inclusive for everyone in Hamilton who comes down to this space and not just the residents, I think should be a goal of this project. And it would be great to see some proposals on how that could be achieved at the base. So again, thank you to KPMB and Waterfront Shores for their participation in this important city building process. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Paula?
Thank you. I think the other members of the panel have captured a lot of the concerns very well, so I'm just going to be brief. I would just like to reiterate the comment made at the beginning of this presentation about the public role of this site. I think this is a really critical consideration, and also if listening to people, members of the public speaking on Tuesday, I think there was a lot of concern around the site becoming rather exclusive. And I think then there really needs to be a reconsideration of how this site can benefit everyone in Hamilton and everyone can have access to this part of the site. And so as has already been said, I think another option that would address the lower levels of the project and how it engages the site and engages the public really should be reconsidered. Secondly, I'd like to point out that the word innovation has been used throughout the scope of work for the DRP. We were to look at innovation in many aspects of this project. So I think it's really important that at the next presentation, if where this project is innovative and truly cutting edge could perhaps be reiterated and stressed would be helpful. This project will be precedent setting and will be an example for all developments that will follow. And so it's incredibly important that it be absolutely outstanding. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Tony?
Thank you, Jennifer. First of all, an excellent presentation, Bruce and Luca primarily. And further to the comments from my colleagues, and Ted stole a lot of my thunder and articulated it very well. Thank you. Again, coming at it through a sustainability lens, we were asked to look at innovation in 3 areas: sustainability, quality of life, design excellence, to name 3, and you can go on. I think sustainability will drive the other areas of quality of life and design excellence in the building. And I think, and based on my experience, when a developer and an architect can clearly articulate an energy target in any form that would look like, whether that's zero carbon or passive house or some other high-level standard, the design will follow and match that target. And that's the success we had at Mohawk with the building, very proud of. But that was the driver, setting the target, which everyone had to buy in on, all the professional team, the contractor, material suppliers, everyone. And I think you've got a lot of the stepping stones there. I think we need to be more specific and far-reaching if we want to use the terms, again, landmark or exceptional design. With all due respect to LEED, and I'm on the board at Kennedy Building Council, LEED Silver is not by any standard today an exceptional design or landmark design. We were doing that 15 years ago. We need to get the bar higher, and I think you're almost there. And I think we need to see that as a committee. I think the public needs to see that at least it was explored in detail, in reasonable detail, that it can be achieved, or possibly can't be achieved unless there's some additional assistance. And maybe the city could help with that. They're the owner of the land adjacent to all of this, and sorry, the land that the building will be on, but adjacent to it all. And there may be some synergies there that can be explored. And if that's part of the makeup of the design, then I would certainly respect that. But it needs to be explored, and and done that way. Otherwise, we know we'll have a beautiful building. With Bruce involved, we know that. But for many, and particularly people who want to own a unit down there or will be living down there, want to know that they're living in it, have paid for the space in an exceptional landmark building, but it also will perform that way. And that's where we need to get to, because as I think Ted mentioned, there's plenty of development that will be moving forward in Hamilton. We want this building, and I think it should, in a landmark location, set the bar at the highest level that people have to aspire to throughout the future of Hamilton, in particular to meet the targets that we know we need to meet from a climate perspective. So anyways, thank you for your time today and tonight. And I know this design will work out well if you can set some clearly articulated aspirational targets. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. David?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce and Luca, and Waterfront Shore. Your development is, and the sort of work that you're doing across the whole pier is great. I mean, I am one of the people that serves on this other panel, and this, by comparison, this is, you know, you're doing some exceptional work here. But of course, you know, there is an expectation of really high standards, and in some way, no good deed goes unpunished. So in some ways, we are, of course, in a position to try and push you and your client is to an even higher level. And as part of that process, I guess I'm going to echo what has already been said, that it's really, we're not really in a position to respond, you know, fulsomely to your submission at this point, just because it's really not providing the options and the standards in terms of commitments for us to really comment in the fulsome way. So I hope that, and it's almost feel like maybe you're in your process are not really ready to share those this level of development yet, and maybe that's why Jennifer is maybe proposing that this process be extended a bit more, so that there is an opportunity a little further along in your process to share how this is going in a way that will allow us to, kind of support the process of pursuing something of a higher level. In terms of commenting on what you have put forward, which, I mean, I have my favorite of the three, and that is in line with what Ted is saying, and for many, some of the same observations about how the organic character of the lily does seem to, I mean, I found your story more convincing, and in terms of the placement between the industrial and the natural context. I think that appearance of it and the proportions of it, it does give a lean, taller look, and I think that I guess the saddlebag fits into its composition a little stronger. I mean, one of the observation about the idea of it as an emblematic and as a monument, a landmark within the context is I wonder if you didn't have the constraint of the envelope that you were given, whether you would be aiming for exactly that height and exactly that height of the saddlebag, or whether in order to create a landmark you would have challenged that. And I guess I would myself encourage you to maybe, just as we're in this, we're challenging you in these, and I'm not going to go into the sustainability conversation. I think everybody's well covered, but I wonder as well formally whether, I find that in some contexts around the lake, it's so far away that whether it's a little bit taller, a little bit shorter, it doesn't make a difference. But as you get closer to it, it seems that a little bit more, I don't know whether the saddlebag should be lower in order to make the main volume a little leaner and stronger, and that transition down to the adjacent complex a little more convincing. But I almost feel like if you took, put a few more stories on the top, I was working out the math. If you put 4 more off, you could knock, I think, you know, a ton of floors out of the saddlebag, and maybe that transition would be a bit more, you know, elegant, I guess. I'm just trying to imagine, how, you know, that possibility. I think that when I look down at the ground floor and how it's set out, I mean, there's a few things that I'm a little nervous about how it's there, and maybe, you know, with further development, it'll be more, I'll find it a little more convincing. One of which is the cantilever over the planted areas. It seems like in the plan, there's a lot of plants that are shown underneath that area, and as well the breadth, you know, the size of that service. You know, you walk 100 feet along a sidewalk beside, you know, the access into the loading and the parking area. Whether that could be maybe there's some, you know, there's some opportunities maybe for a different layout on the ground floor that might be part of this sort of, you know, optional exploration. And to Ted's comment about you know, bringing in some additional community activities, and maybe a 3-story podium is how you achieve it. I wonder even if the point at which the ramp starts going down underground could be shifted north, would allow a little bit more public along that green zone. I forget the name of the cross street. That's the green ward. I think that there's a possibility there. Just seeing if there's anything else. I guess I also agree with Petra's comment about the idea that a building of this consequence and significance within the ambition of the city and its location at this place where, as you showed on your diagrams, you know, looking out from it as well as looking to it, that experience could be shared with the community, that there could be something on the top that you would go to, you know, have that community event, both on the pier in the bigger sense that you would go to the top of the building to have something, you know, like other residentials buildings in other locations have. I think that's worthy of consideration, further consideration. So in any case, I look forward to further development. I'm sure you'll do something exceptional, Bruce. So I'm looking forward to the next stages of this process.
Thanks, David. Calvin?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce, Luca, and Waterfront Shores for being part of, I think, what is kind of an unusual process that we're in. And it might be worth just understanding the genesis of this, which is many months ago when the DRP was presented with the idea of making an exception to the Pier 8 mid-rise format with the tower, their reaction was that it deserved a competition. In fact, they said an international competition. But for many reasons, that was not going to be possible. So in a sense, I kind of think that the process that was anticipated was almost like competition shadowing, where there would be 3 kind of clear options presenting different ways of addressing the criteria of sustainability, quality of life, and design excellence. But I don't think we've really been provided with sufficient information or the options that at this point would lead us to say, yes, there's the potential for this tower to set a standard of exceptionalism and innovation that warrants a radical deviation from the original Pier 8 vision that called for a mid-rise community. I think we were expecting 3 options that addressed these different criteria. But really, the options presented are pretty much limited to the floor plate shape, and the resulting massing configurations. So I think I mean, I would just suggest that in the absence of those options, I would suggest that the next submission be provided that addresses a number of things. Facade expression. Are there different alternatives to, for instance, the kind of what looks like a kind of precast baguette expression? Would the massing benefit from additional step backs that thin the profile of the building as it rises? Because right now we have this kind of uniform extrusion at 2 levels, including the penthouse. Can we look at different materials, different color, different approaches to fenestration, and how that might address the window to wall ratio? We have one proposal for terraces, and I think the inset balconies are great, but are there other approaches to how those spaces could be used and their size? Bruce, I asked you that question about the kind of communal spaces, and I was actually thinking, when I think of quality of life, I'm really thinking, and community, I'm really thinking more about the quality of life for the people who live in the building. So less about bringing in the outside community. I think it would be great if we could start looking at what other kinds of communal amenities create a higher quality of life than towers typically provide. Can we consider innovation for family-friendly design? Are there children's areas that could be shared? Perhaps co-work spaces that aren't just in the lobby, workshops, urban agriculture. And I think my interpretation of the WELL standard is that it suggests that kind of innovation in terms of the spaces that are provided and shared. With respect to the 2-story townhomes or live work, it would be interesting to know if they are live work, you know, what does that imply for the design of those spaces and what options could we look at? I found actually the rendering of the townhomes, because it carried through this kind of baguette expression, a bit overwhelming. So I feel like there's some differentiation in facade treatment that can be explored, especially on the lower levels of the buildings where people are close, the public is close to the building. I think we could look at more options for the design of the muse and how it creates a great public realm with landscaping. Lighting strategies, you know, what options are there for that? The penthouse expression. And I think, you know, quality of life for vertical living also implies innovation in unit design. And it'd be great to hear what ideas you might be considering that we can review. In terms of sustainability, I'm not going to repeat what's already said. I think the fact that you're looking at geosource renewable energy is huge, and it would be wonderful if this project could achieve that. So I'd like to kind of echo what Jennifer said, is I think we need to kind of step back and just review this process in the absence of those kind of clear 3 different approaches, and to see how this process can be sort of amended to provide sufficient information for us to be able to go to a preferred option. Thank you.
Thanks, Cal. I have a few comments and I'll keep them brief. I don't want to repeat what's been eloquently said already. I think you've heard the panel members and that we share your enthusiasm and aspirations to see this project as a ground shifter, to see it change the narrative on sustainable buildings, certainly in Toronto, but also, or in Hamilton, but also for Toronto, you know, beyond Hamilton. There's no reason to limit it to inspiring Hamiltonians, but let's inspire all of Ontario. We've heard that, you know, moving beyond the typical or setting a new standard. Some of those words have been said tonight. In the settlement, the density and the height was granted to this project because it was going to be a leader. And I think it's our responsibility collectively to make sure it is a leader, make sure it's an exemplary building as per the city's aspirations. And to Cal's point, maybe it isn't three clear options that we need to see, three completely different building designs, but maybe we need to see options for subsets of designs. As Cal said, options for this facade treatment. I'd like to see a firm commitment to sustainability, not options there, but options how to get there. So I think Ted put out LEED Platinum, and I think that's certainly achievable in many of the condo projects that some of us have been involved in, but exploring options how to get there. I'd like also to see some options on community integration, community access through and into this building. Cal mentioned the design of the Muse, and I think in conclusion here, it's such a pleasure to be involved in a project like this. It's going to shape the city. It's going to shape the nature of development, and it's exciting to see it happen. We look forward to seeing the next iterations. At this point, we are running over time, but we'll provide some time for Bruce and Luca to respond to any of the comments you've heard tonight.
I mean, I'll start. First of all, you know, really good comments, and it is a very unusual process, one that I think is you know, fairly well structured, but has to, I don't know, balance a lot of things in the, let's say, like the commercial world of development, and so that's the issue, I think, and a lot of really good points. I tried to take as many notes as I could, but we have it all recorded. I think that the, you know, part of me is sticking with the idea that where we started, which was that it's a challenging site, and that the fundamental form we believe in. I think that the issues of you know, pushing high levels of sustainability, quality of life across any and all options was where we were coming from, and we will you know, reiterate, you know, the project, I think, and try to see, you know, how far, you know, because it is really, you know, I do have a client in this that also has, you know, objectives on the project, but I think everyone gets it. And that needs to be, you know, set an example, and so, you know, I thank you for it. I mean, it's a sort of very, very rich discussion. I think the way in which the panelists delivered or asked your questions and delivered your comments is itself really quite good, in my opinion. So yeah, there's lots of work to be done. For me, the biggest question mark is how much, what is necessary, or what would be, I mean, your comments will go to the city, and then it'll be really a question of, I guess, of council making a decision based on your comments and the community's comments, some of which have already been made, to whether this is approvable. And then what are the checks and balances going forward if it is approvable? Obviously, if it's not approvable, that's the end of the process. So, you know, we're honoring that process. We've embraced it, and we're going to just do the best we can do, having heard everything you've had to say. And so I thank you for that level of thought. Luca.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment. I mean, there was the breadth and depth of the commentary was exceptional, and I think that the level of just where the conversation is going and where it has the potential to go, I think it's great, and certainly reflects, I think, what I've seen as a marked shift in the market when it comes to sustainability, and I think we're in this really significant inflection point where a lot of these things are starting to come to a head, and they affect a lot of decisions and how we approach things, and so I really appreciate all of that. And maybe just a comment, I guess, on that process. Again, one of the things that I'm similar to Bruce in terms of the comment, there is, I guess, trying to set the right balance of intent, commitment, vision, and then the tactical execution, some of which really I don't know how well it fits in sort of a zoning process, which is kind of where we really are at, where a lot of the tactics and the details get resolved and massaged throughout schematic and design development. So again, not disrespecting any of the comments. I think they're all really on point. It's just trying to find that right balance of being clear about our commitment and being clear that there is a process that will ultimately deliver on the commitment. And I think our starting point of using 3 separate certification frameworks is an attempt to demonstrate that while the tactics may not be clear, that overall commitment will be honored, and I think that's where some of the value of the third-party frameworks come in that there is a verifiability and a way of ensuring that all of that is delivered. And as I said, I completely echo a lot of the sentiment of transformational sustainable design. So thank you all for really good commentary.
Thank you, Bruce and Luca. We'll all look forward to meeting you again on April 27th. The recording of this panel should be available on the project webpage tomorrow, provided there are no technical issues. I thank everyone who attended tonight, everyone who participated and offered their thoughts and wisdom. And at this point, the meeting is adjourned.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
All right, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.